Coal-burning power plants are the focus of drive to cut mercury. As the tainting of fish and waterways rises, pace of EPA crackdown on emissions is debated. Despite many decades of government attempts to regulate it, ban it, and erase it from household use, the poisonous metal mercury remains a threat to the environment and public health, especially to children and to women of childbearing age. As many as 600,000 babies may be born in the USA each year with irreversible brain damage because pregnant mothers ate mercury-contaminated fish. The Environmental Protection Agency says medical researchers are just beginning to explore such mercury exposure in adults, which can leave some people struggling through life in a disorientating fish fog. Nationwide, more than 8,000 lakes, rivers, and bays are compromised by mercury's toxic effects. Where is all the mercury coming from, and can something be done to stop it? A partial answer can be found in the nearly 500 coal-burning power plants that supply half the nation's electricity. The $298 billion a year electric utility industry is the nation's largest source of mercury air emissions and the latest target of federal and state clean air regulations. Mercury emissions in the USA have been cut nearly in half since 1990 as municipal, medical, and hazardous waste incinerators closed or installed modern pollution controls. But mercury from coal-burning power plants has risen, largely because there have been no federal limits on such emissions. In 2005, about 500 electricity generating power plants emitted 48.3 tons of mercury, an increase of 1% since 2000. Mercury emissions from all other industrial sources were collectively down 33% in the same period. The electric power industry, which has plans to build an additional 153 coal-fired plants, says it is behaving responsibly. It is retrofitting old plants and building new ones with pollution control equipment that will remove much of the mercury, with other pollutants from flue gas. The industry recognizes that by combusting coal, there are things that get into the atmosphere. Two years ago, the EPA issued its first mercury regulation aimed at coal-fired plants. The EPA's new Clean Air Mercury Rule, effective in 2010, is giving energy companies a few more years to cut mercury emissions to an industry-wide 15 tons. That cleanup timetable is not good enough for environmental advocacy groups. A coalition of more than a dozen states, Native American tribes, and environmental groups has filed suit in the U.S. Court of Appeals in Washington, D.C., seeking to overturn the EPA rule and force the agency to get more mercury out of the air sooner. James Pugh, an attorney for Earth Justice, one of the environmental groups, calls the EPA rule a free pass for the polluters. It means more mercury pollution, more waters made unsafe for fishing, and more young children made susceptible to mercury contamination. He says the most common route of human exposure to mercury is through eating fish contaminated with methyl mercury. Microorganisms in lakes and streams convert mercury emissions into methyl mercury, which accumulates at unhealthful levels in large fish. Local or global problem. Even if mercury emissions from power plants and other U.S. industrial sources were eliminated, U.S. rivers, lakes, and bays would receive significant amounts of the metal from a global cloud of mercury. Natural sources such as volcanoes and forest fires, along with industrial faculties in Asia, South Africa, and Europe, are responsible for most of the global airborne mercury pool, according to a United Nations report. The hottest debate is whether the mercury deposited in the USA comes from abroad or from domestic industries. The EPA estimates that less than half of all mercury that falls onto U.S. soil and water comes from domestic industrial sources. It says less than 8% of that is from domestic coal-burning power plants. Maps compiled by the EPA based on computer simulations indicate that mercury is not evenly deposited across the continental U.S., suggesting local emissions may play a role as well. The country's largest area of highest mercury deposits looks like a plume stretching from the Mississippi River through Kentucky, across West Virginia and Pennsylvania, all the way to the East Coast. There are also pockets in the South, on the West Coast, and in Nevada and Arizona. There is evidence that mercury emissions from power plants and other polluters can contribute to biological hotspots where fish and wildlife have unsafe concentrations of methyl mercury. As much as 65% of mercury deposited in a portion of the northeast USA could be attributed to regional power plants and other industries. Although mercury can't be eliminated, it can be reduced, scientists say. We can act globally by cleaning up our backyards and making a difference. These are more signs.